in the film here. The anonymous.
Morning. Morning. Close the door. Page 464. Page 464 is Parshas Tetzaveh. Parshas Tetzaveh, we could present it as a portion that has 4 sections. We have in the beginning a commandment or the information given to the people of Israel that eventually they will take olive oil to kindle the lamp, the menorah. That's section number 1. Section number 2 talks about the vestments, the Bigdei Kohanim and the Bigdei Kohen Gadol, the vestments of the Kohen and the vestments of the Kohen Gadol. That's section number 2. Section number 3, which starts with the Revi, and that is a description of the inauguration and its rituals. There are rituals that were done for the inauguration of the tabernacle. That's section number 3. Section number 4 appears at the end of the portion, and it talks about the other altar. We are familiar with the large altar where animals are burnt, limbs of animals are burnt. This is what's known as the Mizbach HaKtoret, an altar where incense, where spices are burnt on it. And it is described at the end of this week's parasha. The burning of the incense is known as the Ktoret. The Torah describes 4 of them. The rabbis tell us that it is actually a blend of 11 spices. They are to be burnt by the Kohen every single day, half in the morning of a specific measurement, half in the evening. And this is a vessel that was present in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, and eventually, of course, in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. What is interesting here is the fact that you would expect the Torah's description of that vessel to be in last week's portion, where the other vessels are described, where the menorah is described, where the shulchan is described, where the other mizbeach is described, where the holy ark is described. For some reason, the Torah presents the Mizbach HaKtoret, the golden Ktoret, the golden incense altar, at the end of this week's portion, and it seems to be out of place. So that's something that needs some clarification. Now, what is always addressed in this week's portion is the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's name does not appear. You've heard about that. Moshe's name, this is the only time since his birth where his name does not appear in a portion, and this will never occur again unless it is in the Devarim, where obviously it's him speaking. But throughout Torah, in other words, in the book of Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, every portion will have his name. His name does not appear here. There must be significance. And we have to understand a little bit about the fact that we have this ability to break up historical periods. You know, we are historical people. We have this awareness of our history, the history of humanity. And at times, by the way, people who don't have an appreciation for it could look at us as ganz meshuga. In other words, I'll give you an example. When you want to see unseen fireworks, you look at a meeting between Netanyahu and Obama. Right? You sense very well that there's tension there. These are people that have a very different outlook of the Middle East. It's a ness that we've survived. Ribono Shalom has not been so kind to Netanyahu because whenever he is prime minister, he has to either deal with the Bill Clinton, which was a little challenge, or he comes to power a second round 7 years ago. Who does he meet in the White House? Barack Obama. It's a serious challenge, there is no question about it, and, Ribono Shel Olam is hopefully taking care of Klal Yisrael. Now, when they meet, there's always tension there. In one of the meetings, the media was quite upset, and the Washington insiders were upset because Prime Minister Netanyahu was lecturing Obama. What was he lecturing about? About the history of the people of Israel. And he started talking about 4,000 years of our history, of the people of Israel, of the land of Israel. And you see Obama staring through him. To speak to a U.S. president about 4,000 years, right? He thinks basically I'm dealing with a madman. No one walks into the White House, You could perhaps talk a little bit about, history, or if you're dealing with Northern Ireland, you could go ahead and deal with the issues since the 16th century, perhaps. But to go ahead and talk about 4,000 years, that's mishuga. But Jews have this ability that we connect ourselves to our past. We are very historical. We are aware of our history. And we also have the ability to break up historical periods. It is something that appears very often in Talmudic literature. Quite often we read text in the Torah as we take a parsha, like we did it with Parshas Vayishlach, as you remember. That we linked Parshat Vayishlach to the Second Temple, to the Beit Sheni. So now, we always link the illumination of the people of Israel, we break it into two periods. We are believers that what guides us, what is our ethical light, is Torah. But we actually know that there are two parts to Torah. And during one period, there is one type of Torah that guides the people of Israel. And then something occurs, and there is a new type of Torah that guides us. And what am I referring to? When the people of Israel had in the Holy Temple, in the Holy of Holies, the Holy Ark, which contained the tablets, we are told that at that same time they merited to have prophets and prophecy. When they had prophets and prophecy, and they would want to know the word of God, they would turn to the prophet for prophecy. That is what we are told. Now, there still was a system of oral tradition, obviously, but nevertheless, we don't find, for example, disputes that occurred during the First Temple period, because there was this clarity. There was clarity. Now, the clarity was perhaps beneficial for the Jew. You had an issue, a personal issue. You would turn to a prophet. We even find in Tanakh, you lose your donkeys, if you ever lose your donkeys. Today, you're in deep trouble unless you have a GPS locator on the donkey. But in those days, you would turn to the prophet, as we find with Shaul turning to Shmuel. So there's a time that the Torah, mainly, even though the written Torah is a complete text, they still somehow relate to the God of Israel through a revelation. Okay, what we could call a very deep, where you connect to the essence of God through the words of a prophet. Prophecy comes to an end during the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash, Second Temple period. There is an individual that is still viewed as a throwback to the past. Sometimes they have lahavdil, like in football, that will wear the uniforms of the past. They believe that if you go ahead and wear the Maple Leafs wear their uniform from prior 1967, maybe they'll win. Right? There's a throwback. So there are sometimes individuals that really are a throwback to a period of the past. Sometimes they're brilliant people that you sense that it is as if they come from an earlier era. They always talk about the Vilna Gaon, that in the schools I come from, they link him to a period of hundreds of years earlier. So he's really as if from an earlier period. Jerry Roosevelt sent me a link of a pianist that's 11 years old in Israel. You see it? He sent it to you too? Amazing. 11-year-old pianist that he's already recognized as now as one of the greatest around. 11-year-old Israeli kid. So obviously there's like a brilliance of Mozart there that shows up, and he's a throwback to a past. Now, there is, during the beginning of the Second Temple period, an individual, and we are told that he was really as if from the earlier period, because obvious miracles that would occur during the first temple period were occurring in his days. His name was Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik. He became a very popular personality in his days. There are many legends, stories about him. And the rabbis tell us in the Talmud that those miracles that you would not expect during the second temple period were occurring. The bread would remain fresh, and candles would remain lit for an extended period of time. And he became a legendary figure, Shimon HaTzadik, that in Israel, you know that people go to Kvarim, people go to burial sites. He is so popular that he actually has not one but two burial sites. There's a dispute where it is. Some people say it's in one place. Some people say it's in another place. So that's like a sign of being up there. When you have not just one but two Kivrei Tzadikim. What? So now, that's what we have. So we are told that in the days of Shimon HaTzadik, there were still miracles. And then after his passing, it was the end of an era. Now, when there's an end of an era, when we don't gain that clarity from above, how do we know right from wrong? When God is not communicating with us, how do I figure out the truth when we are dealing with issues that were not in existence in the past? The classic example would be, you want to know about cooking in a microwave. You cook in a microwave, correct? It's a milchik bowl and fleishik dish. What's the status? You're not going to find the microwave mentioned in the Talmud. You're going to have to figure out how to apply the law of the past to the items that exist in the present. How do you do it? So the Torah has a new system of figuring out the truth. Get rabbis together, get scholars together. The scholars should debate the issue, vote. If the scholars in one room vote on an issue and make that into law, that becomes the new will of God. And a violation of what the rabbis who sit together in a room decide is as great as a violation of the Torah. So it's like as if it's external, it's not the essence of the Word of God, but even the external becomes suddenly the will of God. This is what we are told. Have that information so far? Now, there is a story in the Talmud, a tragic story that occurs in the last days of the life of Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik has two children. One of them by the name of Shim'i, and one by the name of Chonyo. Chonyo, and Josephus calls him Onias. Now, the way it's presented, there are different versions of the story, but it works as follows. Shimon HaTzadik chooses his son, Chonyo, to be the one to take over his position as Kohen Gadol after his passing. Because Shimon HaTzadik is the high priest, he chooses Chonyo. Shimi is upset. Shimi is older. And he turns to Chonyo right after the passing of the father and he says, oh, by the way, I have this tradition that on the day you become high priest, you're supposed to wear these unique clothes. This odd-looking belt with bells. It seemed to be clothes that normal people would not wear or straight people would not wear. And we are told that listening to his older brother, Chonyo, walks into the Beit HaMikdash, his first day on the job, when there's a big crowd, to go ahead and celebrate his inauguration, and he's wearing ridiculous clothes. And the Kohanim have a very good laugh, and Shimi, the older brother, is spreading a rumor. Look what he told his girlfriend or his wife, it's not clear. It says he wore the clothes of Ahuvato in honor of the first day of work. This is how the Talmud presents it. Meaning, Shimi puts together this major plan to make his brother Chonyo look like a complete fool, hoping that Chonyo will be rejected by the other Kohanim, and he will get the position of his father. Beautiful, very inspiring story. So what happens is that Chonyo is chased out of Yerushalayim. He makes his way down to Egypt, and Egypt is a growing community at the time during some temple period, and he actually establishes a temple there that was known as the House of Chonyo. It's not really pagan, because he did it for the sake of heaven, but it's not supposed to be outside of Israel, especially not in Egypt. So therefore it's a very problematic temple that he establishes there, which historians tell us existed in Egypt, and it was known as Mikdash Chonyo. Now this is a very problematic story, which symbolizes the flaws that existed during the Second Temple period. Jews, brothers, not getting along. What's interesting is that their fight, the way it's presented in the text, relates to bgadim. He tells his brother to wear something odd. He puts on something odd. There is obviously a connection between clothes and what the rabbis are trying to tell us as it relates to that period. Second Temple period, we would call it the period of garments. Garments could be misused, or, as we'll see soon, garments could be the greatest vehicle of unity. And it works as follows. How does a Kohen Gadol officially become a Kohen Gadol? So the rabbis tell us the following, that during the First Temple period, they had an oil. It was known as the Shemen HaMishcha, anointing oil. They would anoint the oil on the high priest, and Mazel Tov, he is today no longer an average priest, but a Kohen Gadol. Towards the end of the First Temple, they lost it, or they concealed it. And suddenly you ask the question, how does a high priest become a high priest when they no longer have the Shemen HaMishcha? So the rabbis tell us that if you read carefully into the text of the Torah indicates that if he has milui bgadim, if he puts on the garments of the high priest, the average Kohen only wears 4 vestments. The high priest wears an additional 4. By putting on the significant big day Kohen Gadol garments designated for the high priest, the bgadim is what makes him. Now, the word shemen relates very much to the word shem. And a shem is a name, and a name is an essence. When you name someone, it becomes the essence of the person. And so too you hear about essential oils. It's the essence of something. So far, so good. During the First Temple period, when we connected to God through the essence of God, a conversation through a prophet, that was a period that we could identify as a period of Shem, essence. You connected to God through His essence. The Second Temple period is a period of bgadim. The way you sanctify a person is going to occur through clothes. Okay, so what information do we have so far? It is a period, as we saw with the story of the children of Shimon HaTzadik, and as we see regarding how you inaugurate a high priest during that period of time, it's a period of clothes, okay, which we'll call external. Mm-hmm. Now, when you want to go ahead and say that someone has no tocha, no essence, you call him an empty suit. And not that you should say it, right, or an empty sweater, but there is such a term that exists. That's what they were using now in the United States. They have, the Republicans are debating who's the most qualified president or insulter-in-chief, right? So they're having these debates. And one of the popular younger candidates is a fellow by the name of Rubio, but all others are saying that he doesn't have the experience. He is, these are the words that they used, an empty suit. This is a term. So when you say that someone has a suit, it's something very external. Clothes are in essence external. And external indicates at times something that's not insignificant. You look at the fact people wearing jerseys of players, right? There's an absurdity to it. In other words, you put on a little jersey of this successful player and you feel connected to his success. I wear the number 23, so I am Michael Jordan. I can't jump 2 inches, and I never make a shot. Maybe you could, because you have grandchildren who are good basketball players. But why is it that I put on a jersey or an Air Jordan running shoes, it is very, very external, right? External is something that Judaism in general tries to distance itself from. But believe it or not, there's actually a benefit with the external. There is a benefit in being familiar with the external. They say that the great Rabbi Yisrael Salant, when he was traveling throughout Europe, he went through different periods in his life. First, he was focusing on rabbinic students in his own yeshiva in Kovna, but then he made his way to Germany and to France to inspire Jews. And he traveled from place to place. And often he would travel with farmers. And he felt that if he's going to go ahead and just sit there with this text and not interact with them, he's going to have they're going to have a negative impression of a Torah scholar. So he became familiar with cows and the type of feed that they need, who likes corn, what types of cows eat the grain, where to get, the value of manure in the marketplace. Rabbi Yisrael Salant became very familiar with these things to create a comfort zone that when he sits down next to them in these buggies that are taking him from place to place, that he'd have a little bit of a conversation, he could connect to them. We would all agree that that's external for him. This is a person that is a brilliant mind, studying Torah in depth, but he feels that we have a responsibility of connecting to people. The easiest way to connect to people is with like matters, right? We all know that there's nothing greater than being familiar with sports. I did kashrus in Buffalo, right? And often I would go into facilities on a Monday morning, and I had to know very well what the Bills did yesterday, or in most cases, if I didn't know, I would just say they lost. I was usually right. But, you had to know, because you have to connect to people with things that are external. You need the external. External is very, very important. Don't let that become your essence. In other words, don't become a person that only knows that, but understands that if you connect to people, to be a ohev shalom, to be a rodev shalom, to be a person who likes and values peace, or one who is able to pursue peace, you have to know how to open a conversation and interact with people on their level. And who obviously represents that more than anyone else? Aharon HaKohen. Aharon HaKohen is the person who is Ohev Shalom, Rodev Shalom, Ohev et Habriot, Mekarvan Torah. He was very much able to understand people. On the most basic level, he could talk to them about anything because he had the ability, he sensed that he indeed cared about them. And if this is a portion about the garments of the Kehuna, the external, now the external is important, but this is a portion about the external. It's a portion when Moshe is concealed. Second Temple period. Second Temple period is they don't have a prophet. They don't have that extension of Moshe Rabbeinu. What do they have? They have a nation that's going to have to debate issues when the light of God is concealed. They're going to have to create a Torah, which we could really call an external Torah, but the external becomes the essence of Torah. And a little bit more to it we could add. You cannot achieve peace when there is no disagreement. In other words, you know what peace is? Peace does not mean that we all come in to a room and we all think exactly the same, right? Talk exactly the same, dress exactly the same, and say we live in peace. That is not peace. It's not peace. That's basically, that we are clones. Clones all get our peace. You know what really shalom is? Shalom is that I think one way, you think a different way. I have one philosophy, you have a different philosophy. I think like a real Litvish Yid, and you think like a Hasidic Yid. And you think like a Nungarish Yid. And we have different backgrounds and outlooks, and philosophically we could debate issues from studying philosophy to studying science to only Torah learning. But guess what? We respect one another. And we get along. That is considered shalom. Now, you can't have that when there's clarity, when there's complete clarity. When we're all standing there at Har Sinai and we all experience something, you can't say, they were all in peace. They were actually. But that's not the great attribute of peace. The great attribute of peace can only come into existence when there is reason to view things differently. When you have a second Beis HaMikdash period, Second Temple period, there's no clarity. You start developing thoughts one way, you think a different way, I think a different way. Then, if we mature, then if we understand the essence of Judaism, then we could go ahead and create peace. Unfortunately, Second Temple period, they had great opportunity for shalom, because everyone saw things differently. But unfortunately, they failed. Now, if you think this is a new thing, or we took care of this problem, right? That now we all agree we see things differently. Two Jews, right? 3 opinions. But we still have the problem, obviously, and what we are hoping to achieve as a nation is to bring ourselves together. A perfect example of how problematic it is, how destructive machlokas is, and how absurd it is a tshuva, this is a responsa, that is written by Rabbi Eliezer Fleckels. Rabbi Eliezer Fleckels is a rabbi in Prague. What was that?
We just try to figure if we really do.
Did you agree with one or not? No. Okay. So Rabbi Eliezer Fleckels takes over the great rabbinic position in Prague. This is an honorary position, a choshva position, in 1793. Okay, he is the rabbi there. He was a no-nonsense rabbinic authority, meaning if someone would say something that was absurd, he would spell it out. And he was asked the following question, and it's hard to believe, but this is what's occurring. You know that during the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we make adjustments to our tefillos. We make adjustments. You say, instead of Hakel HaKadosh, HaMelech HaKadosh. You say in Kaddish, La'elo, La'ela. If you look at the end of Shmoneh Esrei, during Aseres Yemei Tshuva, and you have the last bracha of Shmoneh Esrei, HaMevorech es Amo Yisrael Basholom. And if you look carefully in some of the Sidurim, especially those of you who remember Sidurim prior to our scroll, a few of them would end with the words, Oseh Shalom. You old-timers, not that you're old, but I mean, I'm saying that those who picked up from Sidurim that existed in the old times, you remember it.
They still exist. You just don't use them.
Birnbaum. Okay, so Birnbaum says, Oseh Shalom. In other words, Baruch Atah Hashem, Oseh Shalom. That means they make that shift. And our scroll doesn't. Our scroll keeps it the way you do it throughout the year. So obviously you pick up that there were different schools. Now you want to know the history of these different schools. Where did they come from? How did they develop? So what's interesting to note is that Reb Fleckel's son-in-law sends him a question. And his son-in-law, who lives in a different town, tells Rabbi Fleckels that we have a problem in our shtetl, because the local Av Beis Din made a gzera meaning a decree. The decree was that everyone in shul has to say, HaMevorech es Amo Yisrael Bashalom. And there were many who followed the old custom of saying, Oseh Shalom. And there was a big fight about how to go ahead and label HaKadosh Baruch Hu the God of Shalom. So there was a major fight about how to say the Shalom. They got into a major fight.
Fight over Shalom.
A major, very significant fight. And the Rabbi Fleckels notes that you should know, Kasher alai lehamini. This is hard to believe, that this is the major fight that you're having during Aseres Yemei Tshuva time. We come together. So what do? We have a major fight about how to end the bracha of the God of peace. Now, there's something about us, right? Unique. Now, he gives us the history of it, and this is very interesting. That it works as follows. That Nusach Ashkenazim had their own nuschos that were very old, that were a good 800, 900 years old now, when it was 700 years old. And then there was the major adjustments that occurred from the 17th century on. And it works as follows. As you know, in the 16th century in Tzfat, you have the mystics, the Mekubalim. It became a mystical city and still remains. Some people are visiting Tzfat. The greatest of all was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, known as the Ari. The Ari, to a small group of people, perhaps in his days there were a dozen or so, couple dozen maybe, people who were inspired by him. And he claimed that he senses which words have the proper impact in the spiritual realm, and he made some suggestions to adjust, meaning to make those changes. Now, the changes he suggested were not just pulling them out of his sleeve, but rather there were many different variations. He recommended a few. Fine. In Europe, if you would visit Europe 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years after the passing of the great Ari, he passed away in 1572, no one would know anything about him. They would hear some Maislach, but no one would make an adjustment based on that. Then there was a rabbi in Prague by the name of Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, who eventually makes his way to the land of Israel. And Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz is greatly inspired by the works of these Kabbalists. And before his passing, if I'm not mistaken, he passed away in 1730, they published his works. And they had a very significant impact. The teachings of Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz had a very significant impact on European Jewry. And adjustments began, meaning people started making adjustments. Among them, I have a list of things that the Shloh, it was known as the Shloh Kadosh. He wrote a book called Shnei Luchot Habrit. His name was Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, who was a Levi. He has a lot of descendants, like Hillel Horowitz, who was here a few years ago. He was a direct descendant of Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz. I used to joke at him that he shouldn't be eating turkey, because among the things he said a Jew shouldn't eat is turkey. But there were different things that he taught. But anyway, the adjustments of Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, there's a list that had an impact on European Jewry. Among them was the fact that even though the old practice in Ashkenaz, if you would visit any shul in Europe in the 15th and 16th century during Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the blessing would end Oseh HaShalom. There is no question. That was the norm. But Rabbi Horowitz said that if you are a mystic, meaning if you're special, you should go ahead and use the year-round ending of HaMevareches Amo Yisrael B'Shalom. So therefore, there began these different movements. And that started as a crisis. Rabbi Fleckles tells us that you should know that even our great master, Rabbi Yecheskel Landau, who was the rabbi in Prague prior to Rabbi Fleckles, he says that he himself did make the adjustment of the Shloh of Rabbi Horowitz, but he didn't tell anyone else to change. And then he adds that you should know that even Rabbi Horowitz himself, when he was here in this city, he would follow what he believed, but he would never tell anyone else. So this is very odd to make a whole bitter war.
What about minhag? I mean, it was minhag.
This was an interesting period that minhag was not, there was this leniency. The mystics had an impact that the respect that you should have perhaps for minhag was, I'm not going to use the word lacking, but these were different times. Like, I'm a big minhag person, but if you have a Hasidic Jew, he would tell you minhag, yes, but the Kabbalists had clarity in the spiritual realm, and that would override minhag. That's something they would say. So there are different schools. What I like is the fact that he himself, Rabbi Fleckles, tells us the following. Ani nahakti lomar. I used to say, in other words, in my personal, during Aseret Yemei Tshuva, I too made the adjustment of HaMevarech Amo Yisrael B'Shalom, even during Aseret Yemei Tshuva. Aval acharei shani ro'eh, but now that I see shehashinui, that this change, mevia liyedei machloket, so therefore, this ne'ilah, in those days the rabbi used to daven ne'ilah. So this coming year ne'ilah, you know what I'm planning to do? That when I get up there and publicly end the bracha, I'm going to say, Oseh HaShalom. I'm not going to make the adjustment because there's something far more important than uttering these words, and that is peace. Now this is just one example of hundreds of such situations that you have disagreement. The potential of a disagreement is great. In other words, it's wonderful when you come into a room and people think differently. That's amazing. That's what God wants. God wants when there is a body of Sanhedrin and each one is supposed to share their opinion. It's a flawed Sanhedrin if everyone says the same thing. It's an appropriate Sanhedrin when people share their different opinions with respect, treating others with dignity. You know what they note? That the Sanhedrin would sit like a semicircle. When you sit a semicircle, you see one another. You interact face to face. Right? You respect the others as a human. Then you could go ahead and have a good, healthy conversation and come up with the truth. That is what shalom is. And that was supposed to be what the Second Temple period, in its ideal form. That it's a time of external. They don't have that inner light, but they get along. They treat people with dignity. And therefore, this is a parsha. This is a parsha that has to do with the Second Temple period, a time that we celebrate the menorah, by the way. There were two vessels that symbolize Torah. The Holy Ark, which symbolizes the written Torah, the revealed Torah. It contained in it the tablets which were given during Revelation. But then there was the menorah, which symbolizes the light of Torah. But this is a light of Torah that's kindled by Aharon HaKohen. Aharon HaKohen, the man of peace. This is a truth that comes out when there is peace, when people can have a conversation with respect and with dignity. This is what this portion is about. It's a portion about garments. What are garments? They are external. They are external, but the external, through the external, you can have peace and you can have a dialogue and you could go ahead and come up with the truth. But then, what really brings it all together is the last portion. Look at the last portion on page 482. Page 482. We're talking about the incense altar. One of the rabbis tell us that one of the 11 spices that are required for this mixture of the spices is known as the chelbonah, translated as the galbanum. It has, what we are told, an odor that is simply not pleasant. However, when you mix it with the other 10, if you visit the old city, you could visit the Temple Institute, and you could buy there in the gift shop little bottles of these 11 spices. They tell you not to mix it exactly the way because you're not supposed to, but they did their research and they're preparing for the third Beit HaMikdash there. The galbanum has an aroma that's not pleasant. When it's mixed with the others, it becomes pleasant. The rabbis derive from it the following. This is a statement in the Talmud. That if you have a day, a fast day, a day of gathering, when you are turning to the Almighty in prayer, the only way such a day will be a success, the only way your prayers will be successful, is if you have in your congregation a galbanum. People that are, you could label them sinners. Only a congregation that welcomes such people is a congregation that is desired by the Almighty. Only a group that brings in this 11th man, 10 is a symbol, symbolizes a minion, but you have to bring in the 11th man, the 11th person. You bring in the 11th person, you bring in those that behave in a way that's problematic, you welcome them, and then you feel that there's a kesher, that you're connected to them, that can indeed create prayers that are desirable to the Almighty. The word ktoret, by the way, in Aramaic, a kesher is a keter, the tet and the shin, they do interchange, and therefore the word ktoret could really be the word kesher, which means that we are tied together. We as Jews want to connect, we want to feel this attachment, you want to be tied to the Almighty, you have to feel that you are tied to one another. The Jew who believes that, there are the Jews Unzer mentioned and the others, right? They're my type of people, Anshe Shlomenu, and then the others. There's a problem there. Why? Kol Yisrael, we're all one unit. You want to go ahead and create an environment that an environment that is desirable to God. Ketoret is to teach you that. And obviously, why is this in this week's portion? Because it works as follows. After we learn the message of this week's portion, the message of Aharon HaKohen, or after we activate Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen is the man of peace. Ohev Shalom Roshon. He's not Moshe Rabbeinu. The rabbis tell us that when you would ask a question to Moshe Rabbeinu, so the rabbis say, when the answer from Moshe would be, Yikov Hadin Etahar. Let justice pierce a mountain, meaning nothing could stop justice. The fact that it is extremely difficult, that it will create a problem. If you have clarity, if you experience clarity, it is very hard to go ahead and have any flexibility. Aharon HaKohen realizes that you are allowed to change things for peace. Mutar l'shanot mipnei shalom. This portion, this week's portion, is all about you want to go ahead, right, and elevate the people of Israel. It is achieved by the external entities, which are garments, and the message of the external, the message of the man of peace is Aaron HaKohen. And therefore, the question we started off with is, Why do we place this vessel? Why do we go ahead and place this mizbeach of the Samanim, the mizbeach of the Ktoret, at the end of a portion and not in the earlier portion? Well, the answer is that to have such a vessel to succeed with its mission, you have to first activate Aharon HaKohen, and that's what's occurring in this week's portion. We describe his vestments, we describe his activation during the inauguration, and then indeed you can have this vessel operating and fulfilling its mission. And that's obviously what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. There's diversity among people of Israel, incredible diversity. And God doesn't want to change that. It will be a shame if everyone would think the same. But you want shalom. How do you have shalom? Respect the other as a human being. And hopefully with shalom we will merit, by having internal shalom, we will merit also the external shalom as well. Thank you for coming, everyone. And have a good day. Stay warm, drive carefully.